Hey guys, Stealth here. I'm in the armory of Wargame Red Dragon, but not just the regular wargame. This is Wargame Red Dragon Wished Dreams mod. This Wished Dreams mod is going to change some specific units, change some stats, and overall create a different sort of environment in Wargame. The list of changes is really too long to go through, but let me just read out a few. Revised deck system. Attempting to fix the clown car syndrome, which is probably where you can see your vehicles bumping across the road like crazy. National deck bonuses will be changed to benefit playstyle. For example, North Korea nationalized has a 15% infantry availability. Removal of all command helicopters in favor of increased command infantry. As they come in helicopters, they have the same role. Reservists will only be available at rookie training, which is the lowest of the lowest. All SPOG versus ground ranges have increased to 1500. So say something like the Gepard is now really effective at ground range. Reserve squads will be made 5 points in 10-man squads and will only arrive in 5-point unarmored trucks. All airborne squads, whether special forces or shock, will be 10 men. All marine squads, whether special forces or shock, will be 15 men. Cluster bombs and artillery changed to HE so as to kill infantry and tanks alike, but they won't be as powerful as regular bombs as they cover a wider area. This is a pretty significant change, because normally cluster munitions, I'm going to pull up one like the MLRS, these things usually have cluster munitions. Let's see, let's go with the M270 ATAC MS. This one usually has cluster munitions which fire AP damage, unlike this one which fires HE now. It does a metric ton of HE damage, but it does mean that you're going to have to use this unit quite a bit differently. Other things, all napalm bombs give an HE damage to represent the initial explosions. All commando units, special forces in the infantry tab, will be reduced to 1 card of 7 veteran or 5 elite. And all infantry light anti-tank weapons will be able to fire at helicopters at 275 meter range. So let's say that you have Delta Force, which are of course no longer in the infantry tab. See, that's where this thing starts. Now, to give you a bit of indication about the intent of this video, I'm just going to look at the armory and some of the units. I'm not going to do gameplay just yet, so I will probably be putting some of that up later. But the reason that I haven't been touching mods is that you cannot use them in a standard setting. I cannot just play a mod against anyone I like, because the other person also has to have the mod, or the whole system will crash. And that means that you're either going to have to fight AI, which is just going to spam units like they always do, or you're going to have to fight players, but it's going to be a really selected group of players. And normally I enjoy playing with other guys against AI or against other players, but you're going to have to create a group which is quite large before you can actually get this thing done. Anyway, some of the major changes that I have noticed are, for example, in the tank category. If we look at the Challenger 2, this thing now has a massive frontal armor of 26. 26 frontal armor on the tank. Keep in mind that the Challenger itself can only do 20 armor penetration damage. So a Challenger 2 is simply not able to penetrate its own armor. Looking at some other tanks, the K1A1. This used to be a really good tank. It still is, but it just doesn't have as much armor as you may have remembered it to. Now, I don't know all the stats by heart, so it's a bit of guessing for me, but I think that they had more than 18 armor. About the 20 armor penetration, I'm not too sure. One thing I've really noticed is that the Leopard 2 seems to have been buffed and nerfed at the same time. It has 24 frontal armor and 20 armor penetration. Now compare that to the Challenger, and you can see that the Challenger and the Leopard 2A5 are now exactly at the same price and pretty much have exactly the same stats, except that the Challenger has more frontal armor. Other than that, the Leopard 2 is a bit faster. And they now carry good optics, so tanks can now actually spot for themselves. They don't really need the recon anymore. Something else that I noticed is that the M1A2 is extremely expensive as well as extremely powerful. It does not have as much frontal armor like the Challenger 2 or the Leopard 2A5, but it carries a 25 armor penetration gun. Now that's nice, but it is still not enough to go through the frontal armor of a Challenger. So let's see about some of the Russian tanks. Let's say I was USSR and I wanted to penetrate a Challenger. Could I do it with my standard tanks? The best tank that we can get is, let's say, the T-80UM, which has 22 and 24 armor penetration, so the answer is no, it couldn't pen it. T-72BU, same thing. Not enough armor penetration to pen a Challenger 2. And the rest of these tanks are all inferior. They just don't have the same amount of armor penetration or armor to protect against heavy or super heavies. Now, other than that, some of these tanks have been nerfed or buffed in price depending on how you want to look at it. Anyway, they have their price reduced. Normally, you're just not going to be able to buy a T-72 for 30 points. Or, let's say, the T-72 1989 is not going to be priced at 160 points. I believe these were 140, 130-ish, something like that. So everything's been changed slightly. Now, I'm not going to go over all the nations in detail. That would take me way too much time. But let's just say that you were to look at the US infantry. We got Green Berets all of a sudden, which are pretty much taking the spot that Delta Force was taking. But instead of having only Delta Force, we now also have Delta Force or Green Berets 90, which carry, as far as I remember, the exact same weaponry that the Delta Force do, save for the change of the AT4, and I think they have an inferior squad automatic weapon, but I'm not too sure about that. As for the rest, Navy SEALs are now suddenly in the infantry tab, and you can get a lot of these. You can get, I believe, 7 squads at veteran, which makes for significant boost to the US anti-infantry capability. The riflemen seem to have been untouched by the change. Same goes for the Bradleys. I don't really see any change there. Support-wise, I think we're still looking at the same stuff, except that the US usually only had a standard M270 AT-ACMS, so pretty much the specialized version of it. And now they also have the standard M270. Don't look at the thumbnail, it's probably a placeholder, but you can see that these things have significant changes to their stats. The M270 is basically your standard M270. And it is quite good at nailing stuff in a larger radius. But the AT-ACMS is, as usual, extremely long range, extremely accurate. 910 meter dispersion versus 4.5 kilometers. They also have a rate of fire of a little over 0, so don't expect to fire these things too often, because they simply won't do it. But again, no change there. Patriots seem to have been untouched. Tanks, I already briefly went over those, but you can see that, for example, the M48 A5 is now reduced to a 15-point tank. You now have infantry at twice the price of a tank. So you can actually start throwing tanks around a lot more and not having to worry about them dying too much. Also, the frontal armor of the M48 A5 is pretty good at 7. For a 15-point tank, you usually sacrifice quite a bit of armor. Now, other tanks, I believe they haven't been touched too much. M1A1 HA, when compared to the M1A1, the HA, which I believe stands for heavy armor, but I'd have to look that up, has exactly the same stats as the M1A1, but it carries 7 points more frontal armor, which instantly makes the M1A1 HA a lot more effective against those Russian tanks that we saw. As far as Recce goes, we now have Delta Force and Delta Force 90 in reconnaissance, which is quite unusual. You don't see these things here. Delta Force used to be in the infantry tab as an infantry killer. And they have pretty much the same weaponry, especially for the base Delta Force, but they now have very good optics and very good stealth. So they are now pretty much the behind the forces lines that I believe they should have been. We also got Force Recon, not to be confused with Rangers, because we still have those down here. But this is just another card of Recon Infantry. And if I compare these to the Rangers, I don't really see why they're so appealing. They're both trained at shock. Their stealth is very good, very small, very good optics. As far as weaponry goes, the Car 15 seems to be pretty damn comparable to the M16 that the Force Recon has. The M60 is the same, and the only difference is the light anti-tank weapon, which has a range of 700 and an armor penetration of 18, versus a heat round fired by the M72 Law, which has a lower range and a lower armor penetration. So I'm not sure why you would ever want to bring in Force Recon. I just don't see it. But who knows, maybe there's a good reason. The rest of it seems to have been untouched. So let's move on to vehicles, where you're going to find pretty much the standard vehicles for the bunch. LVTP 7A1 is of course not really a vehicle, it's more of a transport. Super Dragoon, I believe this one is unusual, because it's a transport that carries a Dragoon. I don't think we had those in the base version. Other units, the V150 76mm, this thing may have been in Wargame all the time, but if it has been, I have completely overlooked it. Not that the stats are that good, but it just doesn't ring a bell for me. Maybe it was in there, maybe it wasn't. Helicopters, I believe, have not been touched much. Maybe though the the Recon longbow has been buffed to have an accuracy of 70%. But now that I'm looking at these stats in detail, I'm pretty much uncertain about everything, because I usually play these things pretty much by how they feel, and sometimes they just, I don't know, I don't really have the numbers at heart or present here on the screen to compare them. At the air tab, something has changed. You have a few different or added units. For example, the Thunderbolt was already in the game, but now you have the Thunderbolt 2, which has been significantly buffed. It's still a slow plane, but it has better ECM. There's the same amount of armor, but the missiles have been buffed to get an accuracy increase of 10%, as well as having the Avenger be more accurate, which is definitely a welcome addition. Something else that I noticed here is, the Tomcat's probably not going to be in the air tab, it's probably going to be still in naval. But take a look at the Super Hornet. This thing can now be just ordered from the air tab, where it actually outranks the Eagle in its stats. The Eagle has 2 missiles less. It has a little bit bigger turning radius, 325 over 300, and I believe this was 350 or maybe even 400. And other than that, the Super Hornet can stay over the terrain or over the map 5 seconds longer. But you're going to be paying 10 points more for that. So that was the US. Let's see if the Brits have anything else. Not in the air tab really, but maybe vehicles. Let's see, they got the Stormer, of course, nothing really special there. I'm not sure the Buffalo was in. I think it was, but I never used it, probably because it carried some sort of, or it was an inferior transport to the Royal Marines, which made it really unappealing for me. Not something really interesting here. SBS, tanks, yeah, I mentioned the Challenger with an insane amount of frontal armor. Good luck penning one of these. Even the best ATGMs, that includes ATGMs launched from planes, unless you have something that has some of the highest anti-tank or armor penetration values, you're just going to bounce off the front of a Challenger 2. Which I think may have been a really good buff, because it means that the Challenger 2 is not invincible, but it is going to take a lot of flanking in order to kill it. And I think that that is how the Challenger was supposed to be used. The British have some really, really good tanks. And the Challenger 1 is 2 of it, of course. You can see that the Challenger 1 Mark III still has 22 frontal armor, and this is the stat that used to be reserved only for the super heavies. And other than that, even the Challenger 1 Mark I has 20 frontal armor, which is significant. Moving back, let's see, support-wise, I don't think that they have touched these too much, except for maybe the ground range. The Stormer seems not to have gotten any changes. Let's see about the infantry. Nothing that catches my eye right away. And as far as logistics goes, doesn't look that interesting. Now what is interesting, and I'm going to skip right to Germany and the vehicle tab, is this. You now have the Weasel 1 TOW 2 and the Weasel 1 Mark 20. Those were always in the game, just as pretty terrible vehicles because of that extremely low autonomy. But what would happen if you could drop those things off from a helicopter? Then they would all of a sudden get really useful. Because now you're paying 35 points for a helicopter and the Weasel 1 Mark 20, which in itself isn't very interesting. But dropping off a TOW 2 version of the Weasel 1 is going to be pretty significant. Because now you can suddenly drop off 25 armor penetration AP missiles, which usually had trouble getting to the front, but now can just be airdropped. So I think this is a really interesting addition, or a change really, to the way that the Weasel 1 is used. Mortar 2 still seems to have all of its stats intact, with its massive frontal armor and a good rate of fire. Let's see about the infantry, Fallschirmjägers. Yeah, we got some new one. We got the Gebirgsjäger, which seem to be maybe similar to Panzer Grenadiers. Let's compare those. Panzer Grenadiers have been reduced. They used to be shock troopers, and they are now regularly trained troops, which also carry pretty bad weaponry. They usually carried some high-end anti-tank weapon, which I believe was the same one that the Fallschirmjäger carried. What the? Okay, I'm gonna have to look at this in a bit. You can see that the mod still surprises me, because I have looked at it, I haven't played it yet, but a lot of changes in the armory, I'm like, what the hell? But okay. The Gebirgsjäger seem to have taken the place of the Panzer Grenadiers, but their transport is a bit different. The Gebirgsjäger don't have the mortars that the Panzer Grenadiers come in. So these are pretty much, I don't know, motorized units. Maybe that's the way that they're supposed to be used, as a sort of fast holding force or fast pushing force, which strikes me as a bit odd, because a pushing force in my mind usually has a quite good transport, and the Panzer Grenadiers have good transports but not really the infantry stats to back them up. The Gebirgsjäger have the infantry stats to start pushing but not the vehicle, so this is going to be interesting. Anyway, what just caught my eye is that the Fallschirmjäger now carry a grenade launcher instead of their anti-tank weapon. So you can now make a choice between the standard Fallschirmjäger, and these guys are pretty much an all-round anti-everything force except for anti-air, but they're going to be pretty effective when dealing with transports. The Fallschirmjäger 90 carry a grenade launcher, and this is pretty much to counter the threat of seals, I think, although that's a blue-on-blue situation, but let's say they have other infantry which also carries grenade launchers. So that's another interesting change here. Leo 2A5 has been touched a little bit. It is pretty fast, as I mentioned. It has a lot of frontal armor, but its gun isn't that good. Other things that I'm spotted here, nothing really in the vehicle tab, helo tab. No, all of this is intact. Something that I did notice in the French deck is that the Leclerc seems to have been, I don't know, reduced to a medium tank almost. It is a very modern tank, 1993, but its frontal armor is only 20. It only has 20 armor penetration. It still has a really high rate of fire for a tank, but that means that it's going to be firing all of its shells within 2 minutes if you let it. Now that was always an issue, but it used to have quite a bit of good armor penetration. And for example, if you are doing blue on blue, good luck trying to kill a challenger with one of these. You just won't go through. Let's see if they have anything else in the recon tab. Nope, looks good to me. Of course, scanning for new units now. I'm not that interested in all the specific stats, because that would mean going through 1500 units, and I don't think you nor I have the time to do that. Let's see about the aircraft. Nothing too much special there. Let's see how Canada's doing. These all look pretty standard. Supports. No, doesn't look like they got a lot of love. They all look pretty much like they used to be. Chimera. Did the Chimera get an armor penetration buff maybe? Or was it always 19? I'd have to look that up. I'm not sure if this one was in the Canadian deck. The TH495. I thought this was only in the Norwegian deck, but I could be mistaken there. Anyway, decent transport with an autocannon. Helos, of course the same old there. So nothing really that interesting. Let's have a look at the Anzac, for example. Yeah, they got a new seaplane. They got the F-111C EW, Electronic Warfare, carrying 4 long-range high or anti-radiation missiles. So this really is a nice seed craft, because I don't think that they had one, or if they had one it was the Voodoo. But this one is quite a nice addition, although the ECM on the craft itself could have been a bit higher. F-111C still carries a metric ton of those 1000 kilogram bombs. Let's see about the helos, vehicles. Let's see about the Vickers Mark 11. No, this thing doesn't seem to have been touched. Maybe it had 16 armor penetration, which got buffed to 17, but again, I'd have to look that up. Recce looks the same. Tanks, nothing that really interesting. They just don't have a lot of tanks. But they don't seem to have a lot of everything, which was always Anzac's problem. But they make up for that with great infantry. And let's see if they get any new ones. Not really. No, it looks like they haven't been touched that much. So let's have a look at China, for example. See if they've been getting some changes. They got the... hang on. This seems to be a helicopter inside a helicopter as far as stats go. But it's actually an ATGM team, I think. Ground range, 50% accuracy, 24 armor penetration. So they just named these after the missile that they carry. HN5 Bravo. I think this is a better version of the AA missile. Legion 90s still have their napalm launcher. Legion Standard still have their RPG. Luzanduis. Looking standard. Zanshis. Not too much interest in there. As far as logistics goes, let's see about the command tank. Still pretty expensive for only having 7 frontal armor. And these guys have probably gotten a availability buff, but I can't see that in the armory. As far as support goes, bit of a weird icon here, but it seems to be an improved version of the HQ61. So they now have a nice lineup here. They got good anti-helo defense, they got good anti-air defense, and an even better anti-air defense if you want to spend 80 points on that. PGZ-95 was always a pretty interesting unit with a lot of good weaponry on it. The rest of them... it almost seems like these things have 2 batteries on top of them, as far as the stats go. So how does this work then? Because they got one that says 7 HE and one that says 2 HE. I'm a bit confused there. These things actually do suppression, these things don't. I don't know what this is about. Let's see about their tanks. Their best tanks is the ZTZ-85-3, 17 frontal armor, and an armor penetration of 19. Now if I'm going to quickly compare that to the Brits, this pretty much compares to a Challenger, anything between a Challenger 1 and a 2. Let's say a 2 because that's the same price range. Better frontal armor on the British tank, but worse or inferior gun to it, of 16 versus 19. Rate of fire is a bit higher for the Challenger. Off-road speed is a bit better for the ZTZ, but it only has medium optics versus good. So you can see all sorts of small changes which will definitely impact the type of gameplay that you will get out of these vehicles. Let's see about the other units. Nothing really out of the ordinary there. Air. Some of these crafts I just don't even recognize anymore, but it's mostly because of the thumbnail. No, I don't think that these have been changed too much, although I'm not familiar with the J11. Looks to me like an SU-27 version, but probably a Chinese nationalized unit, which carries pretty effective weaponry, if only that PL-11A wasn't radar guided. That would be a really welcome change. Let's see about North Korea. B5 still there. Don't really see any units changed there. But again, there have probably been dozens and dozens and dozens of changes, but I'm just skipping over them because I don't know all the stats and I haven't seen how these things play yet. Interesting, by the way, to see the Type 59 at only 15 points. Okay, it's not going to hit anything, and if it's going to hit, it's not going to do any damage to it. And it's not likely to hit it at all with its terrible rate of fire. But other than that, you can now get a Type 59 for 15 points. Or an improved version of the Type 59-1 for 20 points, which actually has quite improved stats compared to the base one. Sports. Ponge is still there with its standard high range. Let's see about the rest. No, it looks pretty familiar. Infantry maybe. Yeah, we got the Bullseye 2, which carries Fagot missiles, and we got the Bullseye 3, which carries Concours. Now this is a welcome change, because the North Koreans didn't really have any good ATGMs, as far as I remember. Yukyonde, Type 92. I think that the Type 92 was a reconnaissance unit. It always resembled me of a duck a little bit, or it reminded me of a duck, but with this it actually becomes pretty damn dangerous with the grenade launcher and the Concours. Let's see about the other ones. Ryukyonde, recoilless rifles. I think these were named differently, or I'm confusing them with a different unit. But there were recoilless rifles in the North Korean army. That much is certain. I think that covers most of the countries that I usually play with. I know that's not entirely fair to the other nations, but I just don't play them that often. Japan, for example, I wouldn't really know what has been changed. Although this one is new, I can tell you that much. The Type 01 LMAT seems to be an ATGM doing a lot of armor penetration, and finally we have an infantry unit with 26 points of armor penetration. So this thing, if it was to face the Challenger 2, could go through and do a bit of damage. Finally. Another interesting stat, it's fire and forget. Pretty much every infantry unit is fire and guide the wire. Here, guided. This is a fire and forget weapon. Or, as we sometimes call it in the stream, fire and fuck off. Anyway, interesting unit. Supports. Nothing to change there. Tanks. Kiyomarushiki has gotten a bit of a buff to its frontal armor, it seems. Rate of fire is really, really high on this tank. I think that's the main buff for this tank. 12 rounds a minute rate of fire is insane. Recon the same, vehicles. Nope, nothing new there. Nothing new there. Aircraft. Nope, nothing new. Okay, to wrap up this video, I want to have a look at the air tab and see if there's any anti-tank plane that can go through the frontal armor of the Challenger. Yeah, the Su-25s can do it with 28 armor penetration. But keep in mind that you're going to have to fire 5 missiles into the front of a Challenger 2 before that thing finally dies. So this is sufficient at 28. There's another one with the MiG-27s and the MiG-27K. This one's going to do significant damage. But it's also quite the investment to take out the Challenger 2. And even if it fires 2 missiles, it's going to do 26 armor penetration. That's going to be negated by the Challenger's armor. So you're going to have 4 points of damage that actually goes through. Meaning that the Challenger will still have 2 blocks of HP left. But it's probably going to be really expensive to repair. So I think that those are some of the only planes that can really punch through the armor of the Challenger. This one is 26. Let's see about the others. 28. Now we're getting somewhere. 30. Hang on, wasn't the Su-22 M4 basically a seed craft? Maybe it's a different version of it. The Seria, of course, really good armor penetration of 30, but still it only carries 2 of those, so it's going to have to come back for a second run and finish it off. The Su-27M, still only 30 armor penetration. Anyway, I hope you got a bit of an idea of what has been changed by the Future Dreams or the Wished Dreams mod. I'm going to be playing it a little bit to see what it's like and if there's really any major differences to gameplay. And I'm going to be doing that against some AI first. If I can't get some good footage out of that, I'm going to call on you guys to install the mod and have a few games with me to see just how it performs and whether this mod is any good or not. At any rate, I think it's great that people do make mods for Wargame Red Dragon. It is a major investment of your time to actually make all of the changes, try to balance everything out, invent new units, stuff like that. So big compliments to the authors of the mod. Even if I may not want to play it, modding takes a lot of time and a lot of dedication. So I think we can all take our hats off to those guys. Anyway, with that, it's the end of this mod review. I hope you liked it. I'm going to be putting up gameplay soon, as mentioned, and I hope you enjoy that. Let me know what you think of the mod in the comments down below. And if you liked it, hit the like button, and I'll be seeing you next time.